I guess I'm gonna just record to this machine. All right, so here we go. Okay, so this is uh this is a hike that I did in 2018 with a group of two friends. They are Alexei Dokukin and Tatiana Mikhailov. Alexei leads the Russian-speaking outdoor club of Seattle, and he's been a friend of mine since 2016 when Nadia, who's on this call, actually introduced us. I was introduced to him because I spoke to Nadia about my first Rainier attempt in 2015 that went really, really not good, and where I had my first true lesson on the effects of high altitude, and to an extreme point where I actually got very, very, very altitude sick because I got altitude sickness, climbed down. This was on Rainier, day 3. I got altitude sickness. I climbed down 1,000 feet to Ingram Flats, which is the camp that's above Camp Muir, and Camp Muir is the first camp on Mount Rainier at 2,000 feet. At 10,000 feet. And Ingram Flats is at 11,000 feet. So I climbed down to Ingram Flats and I tried to sleep off my altitude sickness. That was a bad mistake because in a superheated tent, and it's still at 11,000 feet, you're still very badly affected, and you just don't know it. And next thing I know, I actually lost 4 hours of time. My mind started recording again about 4 hours later with me being on a rope team and being handed a second trekking pole. And my friends had put my gear on me, and I didn't have my backpack on me, and I had to be walked down another 1,000 feet to the ranger station at Camp Muir. So after that, one would think that it's like maybe one wouldn't go back to altitude, but I absolutely loved going to the West Coast and seeing those kind of mountains because I had fallen in love with the mountains in the Adirondacks and in the Whites, which is where my group of friends that went to Rainier, like we all gathered a couple times per year. And I wanted a second opportunity at Rainier now that I had studied so much about what went wrong and what I should have known and how all these things could be mitigated. But I wasn't sure like how to go about it. So I spoke to Nadia about it at the AMC climbing group, and she introduced me to Alexei. And I spoke to Alexei, and he said, "Come," and we ended up doing. This is a just going to get a little too tangential. We ended up doing a couple other trips together. We couldn't do Rainier that year, but we did all the mountains leading up to it, which included Hood. Hood I've done twice now, and you'll see that in just a moment. And uh, and a whole other series of volcanoes across the west coast. So I'm going to leave those out of this explanation. Tatiana is Alexei's friend. She is a like a professional painter and painting instructor from the former Soviet Union. So I'm going to go to the next slide. There we go. What led to the idea? I guess I have to mention another trip. The trip before this one was when Alexei, his club, and I attempted Denali. And this idea came to me when we were coming down, when I was coming down with somebody from Denali that I was taken down after they got altitude sickness. So no, they didn't get altitude sickness. They had a leg injury, but that part doesn't matter. So the idea came to me that we seem to be able to, like Alexei, myself, and maybe others seem to be able to handle high altitude, but as long as they are up there for one day at a time. So for me, the onset seems to be after I wake up. So sleeping turned out to be the most difficult part of being at altitude for me, not the actual long, strenuous hike. And for Alexei, it was the same thing. And I noticed this over a pattern of mountains that we have done before Denali and on Denali. And this was just a realization that I had. And I thought to myself, like, we did all these other peaks in one day and then in a different trip. Why not do some of these others? Why not actually line up a full West Coast trip. And I spoke to Dexy about it, and he's like, this is insane, but this is kind of awesome. So let's do it. And we originally was just going to be the two of us, and Tatana came on board at the very last moment, and I just said, why not? And one thing I have to mention, it's like when you line up trips like this, uh, you have to be okay if things don't go as you expect. So you, for example, on the very first trip, we didn't summit every mountain. We attempted several tall peaks like St. Helens, Glacier Peak. Rainier was on there. We couldn't get to Rainier because we got hit by a snowstorm. There was Mount Baker, which we did successfully in one day. That was normally done in two, and was one of the mountains that gave me the idea. Denali, I got to Camp 2 before taking down a person, and Alexi got to the camp before the final camp before the snow turned so bad. So when you're going through all these mountains, I know we're used to succeeding a lot on the East Coast because there really isn't a ton of danger here, except for when we go up Mount Washington. But when you go out there, you kind of have to be more okay with not finishing if you really want to, I guess, kind of like feel safe, because you have to also think that the people you are with are okay with not finishing, because the consequences of pushing forward are much worse if done in a bad way than out here. So that explains the first two bullet points. The third bullet point, photos, I just mentioned earlier, I couldn't get to all my photos, but that's actually a fortunate thing, because this thing would be so long, it would be obnoxious. I already have 38 slides, and I'm going to keep going. So high altitude sickness, I wanted to give a primer on this because I fear that this is going to give unrealistic ideas to some people about how much they can do and what days, and I wanted to share everything I knew so that people know what they're dealing with in a way that I didn't when in 2015 this stuff happened to me. So HAPE and haste are two of the conditions that you're going to experience when you're going to altitude. HAPE is high altitude pulmonary edema, which means it's water in your lungs. It's going to affect your lungs. It is less common than the high altitude cerebral edema, which is the swelling of your brain, actually, of your head. And it's also one of the reasons why I do not recommend wearing tight headgear, neither a helmet nor hat, because I've experienced haste exacerbated by it when I was on hood the first time, not knowing that it was my hat, and it was not, I was like, I shouldn't be experiencing this, and then I took off my hat, and all of a sudden the world became much better, and I noticed that it was the hat only because when I would look upwards, all the pain of haste would go away. But when I would look downwards, it would come back, and that seemed very strange. So, and what athletic young men means is, after my incident on Rainier, I looked into everything I could find on altitude sickness. And the demographics speak to athletic young men being the most affected. And so basically, if you take up smoking cigars and whiskey and you wait until you're like 50, your chances of getting altitude sickness are not so bad. So essentially, what happens is, if you're athletic, you have a couple of things against you when it comes to altitude. First of all is your muscles are using up oxygen even when you're standing, because you have probably an abundance of muscle. At the time that I got sick, I was running an average 30 miles per week for myself. And I run right now somewhere in the range of like about around 20, but back then it was even more. And what happens is, it's not just your muscles sucking up the oxygen when you're standing doing nothing. When you go to sleep, you have a condition that they call lazy breathing. Your body's used to breathing a certain amount when you're not running because of how much your lungs are acclimated and your body's acclimated to being efficient with the oxygen that you take in. But this is a horrible thing to happen at altitude, because you're going to be breathing as if it was at the same oxygen level as you were down below. And you're going to be starving for oxygen the whole night. You're not going to know it, and you might wake up with pulmonary edema, as I did on Denali a year before this trip. So that is going to bring me to the next slide. I know that this is a wall of text, but bear with me. I'm going to try and get through it as quickly as possible, and I feel I should, like, I have a responsibility to do this. So altitude strategies. You probably heard of climb high, sleep low. You can take that and hydrate. You can take the first two to an extreme, as I did on this trip. You climb all the way to the top of the mountain, and then you come back to ground level. That is for me, and probably for others, it turned out to be a really fantastic way to accelerate acclimatization. Hydration, also very important, especially if you look at point number 7. If you're taking Diamox, and you should be taking it about twice per day, as you're usually actually even earlier before your climb, maybe a day or two. That means you're going to be ejecting water out of your body really, really quickly if you're doing this. So extra hydration, very important, especially on Diamox. 2, premeditated hyperventilation. So the moment, even before you feel anything, every time that you get a chance to take a break, I want you to experiment with this fun fact that you can just stand there at high altitude, hyperventilate the crap out of yourself, and still not faint, or not even come close to fainting. It is a fantastic thing, and it will help you quite a bit after your stops. Because your whole body at that point is kind of screaming for oxygen, and you will no longer notice it because you stopped until you start walking again. And this will become pertinent when I start talking about Whitney, where you have a very, very, very long walk at high altitude after you're already super high. Number 4, minimize effort. So one of the things that causes you to use up extra oxygen is how much effort you're putting in, which has to do with a lot of different things, but pack weight, your shoes, and your poles. So poles make things easier. Like, they might not be trendy with everybody, but I cannot ignore the fact that they make it easier on my leg muscles and on my knees and overall. And the funny part is if you use poles, you actually burn more calories than if you just hike upwards and put all the load onto your legs. So if you want to lose weight and you want to reduce the amount of effort that it's going to take you to come up or down, use poles. Pack weight, everybody has different ways to address pack weight. It's too many things to address in this conversation, but don't frivolously put things in your pack that could like add up to causing a lot of extra effort on your part. Make sure you look into where you can get water along the way, like on Whitney, so you don't put in the full like 3 liters if you don't want to. Unless you want to be extra safe, I put in.
Dad, and then.
I'm sorry. Can you save the questions until the end? And shoes are important because the amount of extra effort that you exert when a shoe has just a couple extra ounces is actually significant, because you're stepping about 3 times per second. So if you have even 1 ounce, basically if you multiply that, so that's 3 ounces of lift per second, and it doesn't take you very long to get to 1 pound. So in just, let's see here, 16, somewhere around 4 seconds. In about 4 seconds, you'll be lifting an extra pound compared to a person whose shoes are only a single ounce lighter. And that's not just lifting, it's lifting, accelerating, decelerating, and dropping. The amount of energy that is drained from you, you will only notice on longer hikes or strenuous hikes like the ones we're describing here. Point number 5 is the oximeter or oximeter watch. I have an oximeter that, you know what, I'm gonna switch to camera mode in just a little bit, and I'll show you the oximeter I have and the oximeter watch I've recently invested in. 6, ibuprofen. So items 7, 8, and 9 are different medications that you get. They're all prescription. And ibuprofen is the one that's non-prescription and has a lot of research behind its effectiveness on altitude sickness, both as a preventative measure and an intervention measure. Acetazolamide, Diamox, most people know about this. Dexamethasone and nifedipine, you can learn a lot about the application of these 2 medications if you read the Western Buttress, which is like the ultimate guide to hiking Denali. These 2 are taken as intervention. So once you have the onset of pace, dexamethasone is what you take, either for you or for the people on the trip. So I was the medical person on the trip for Denali. That's why I came down after Camp 2 with that person. So I had to read through all this, know this by heart, and I already knew a lot. So that's why I was elected to be the medical person for the trip. Uh, Nifedipine prescription intervention for HAPE. So if you start getting water in the lungs, you need to get this stuff into the system of the person who has water in their lungs or yourself. How do you know if you have water in your lungs? It sounds like when you exhale completely, it sounds like you have a Rice Krispies in your, I guess, in your lungs because you have water bubbles. So you can feel it when you're like, if you're laying down on the ground, that's the easiest way to feel it because that's like the worst situation. The water will be spread through your lungs. You'll have to literally sit up to get the water out. And if you lie on your stomach, you will also feel it. I should also mention that if you're already feeling HAPE, there is a, no joke, 50-50 survival rate. And I've experienced this condition twice. It's basically like tossing a quarter 2 times, hoping for the best outcome. Do not recommend this. So the moment that anything that you feel like you can't inhale fully or that you feel like there's water, even when you're asleep, even if the whole tent is asleep, you need to notify somebody and take this stuff immediately. Also, labeling. I will show you in a moment how I labeled mines because you need to anticipate having to take these under the worst conditions. You will have altitude affecting you or the other people, and you have no idea how the other person is going to be acting under the effects of altitude because people do become different personality-wise. So you need the least amount of effort to find and administer these. And point number 10, I should have just given that a number, is not just label clearly, but try all of these before your trip because some of them do have side effects, and they're mostly safe, but there's a chance that they will have a side effect. So you want to experiment on yourself before you go out there. These medicines are typically for other conditions like diamoxis for glaucoma, and I forget what the other ones are for. But they're very well documented. And I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to show you something on camera. Can you see me on camera?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the top of each one of my medications has got a label on it where I wrote HACE 2 times daily, HAPE intervention, HAPE intervention and on summit day. So HACE intervention and on summit day. So this medication, the dexamethasone, is also recommended for summit day based on what I read. And the oximeter, this is what an oximeter looks like. They're battery powered, they're very lightweight. You just open it up, put your finger in there, and you wait for a certain amount of seconds until there's a readout on this side that shows you your blood oxygen level. Brain cells begin, so normally right now you have in the high 90s for how much oxygen you have in your blood, so it should show somewhere like 95% and up. Brain cell death begins at about like 82%. You will begin to feel oxygen deprivation at, I think different people feel it at different amounts. So I would say if you feel weird at all, if you feel drunk at all, if you stumble at all, then you're probably experiencing cerebral edema already. You need to get down. This is you do not want to take this any further, even if the summit is just like 100 yards away, because it only gets worse and coming down makes it rapidly better. All right, I'm going to switch back to sharing my screen. Let's see it. And go back a few slides because that's a little ahead. Okay, so we finished this slide and I'm going to go to the next one. So the beginning, actually the preparation. There's a couple of things that you should take into consideration other than altitude. They are beacons, of which there's 2 flavors. One is called InReach and one is called ACR. ACR is like stays powered for 5 years and has a very good record. And it doesn't cost a monthly fee. Although if you pay a low monthly fee, you could turn it into like a text messaging machine. And if you get either InReach or ACR, remember to register them. And also test them. And the testing instructions are very specific. You have to do it in a certain hour of the day to not make it seem like an actual emergency to the people who are reading it. Permits. Permits for every peak that you want. Know the date of their release a year in advance, because it can become very hectic if you try to like even wait for a couple of months beforehand, because a lot of these permits are really competitive. I could not get Shasta permit. So the reason why this hike has South Sister in it is because we couldn't get Shasta permits, no matter how much I tried or how many people I tried to buy it off of. National park passes, really useful for parking and entering parks. If anybody in the group has one and you're driving in only a single car, fantastic idea to just take that one and not have to pay for park entry fees. Figuring out your camp locations beforehand. Some of your camp locations will actually be at the destinations where you're going to, at the trailheads, or you'll be sleeping in the car, which I'll show you is totally possible in a couple of these locations. But some of them will also be in between. Like you can't drive from Shasta to Whitney in a reasonable amount of time, or from South Sister to Whitney, and you'll see how I stopped in between. Rental car considerations. So figure out which kind of size car you want to rent, especially if you want to sleep in one. See if the back seats fold over. That'll be important. And check the recent trip reports, which are either on websites for that specific mountain, or another fantastic thing is there's an app called All Trails that used to suck but doesn't suck anymore. And they have people posting their trip reports on there, and you will very often find a lot of stuff that you should be aware of. Like, for example, I was looking at the trip reports recently for Whitney when I was putting this together, and apparently there's been an earthquake today, a 5.8, that has taken out both the road going up to Whitney and a part of the trail. I would have never known if I didn't log into All Trails, and the earthquake was like reported 11 hours ago. Food acquisition and digestion. So as you're going between places, you're going to need to stock up on food, and it's a good thing to know where the stores are. And a really good store that I found that has got food that was fairly cheap is Safeway. Just figure out where the Safeway is or other supermarkets are. Also Trader Joe's. Who does not love Trader Joe's? And figure out where you were going to be stopping for food so that you have that in mind so that you don't run out, because that's important, because you'll be packing for your trips at your campsites and you don't want to run out of the campsite. And also you'll be shopping for the whole group. So think about that, because you're going to have to get together on what food you're getting. I was the person who prepared my group's food, but it was fairly easy because everybody loved bagels. So, and back then I used to be able to eat bagels. Now I can't do gluten. There's some funny photos of that later. Digestion. Nothing like this is not the time to get like order Thai food, Thai hot, and then bring it to the top of the mountain. Altitude affects digestion quite a bit. You do not want anything crazy to try and digest or experience for the first time. No matter how much that Nepalese restaurant smells delicious, this is not the time to try yak. Avoid weekends. Another important part is a lot of these mountains are popular, and they have a lot of guided trips. And if you go on the weekends, you're going to run into people that will cause bottlenecks throughout the mountain, because there'll be an experience, or there'll be a guided group, or who knows what it'll be. So try your best to avoid weekends. And that's it. So now let's get to the actual trip. Mount Hood, logistics. You can sleep in a car or tent in the parking lot, which is what we did. You can store your gear under the car, which is what we did when we were sleeping in the car. One of our people was sleeping in a tent beside the car. The parking lot was huge, and they have facilities with water. And the year before that, when we went 2 years before that, they had showers in the parking lot. I forget if they had it now. If they did, it's probably a cold shower. But if you're okay with that, all is good. Think about surprises when you're going up Hood. Despite the fact that it's one of the most climbed mountains, I have run into surprises both times when we did it. The first time, the most common route, which is known as Hog's Back Ridge, terminated in a place that typically does not terminate other years. So the very end of it was in a super rocky, not very snowy or icy place. So to climb it, you basically had a ton of loose rock, like interspersed with some ice that made it even worse. And we had to go by a different route called the Mazama Chute that year. I'll demonstrate that route in just a little bit. The second time we did Hood, which was this trip, we ran into a bergschrund at the very top. I will actually go into what that is later, but to give you a heads up, it's the first, at least this is how it was described to me the first time, but the diagrams might show it differently later, but it's the first place where the glacier cracks off the mountain. And this was right under, and this is apparently a very common feature underneath the a place called the Pearly Gates up on Hood, which is near the very summit. It's like a split path that you will be going through as you near the summit that's more vertical than other parts of the mountain, called Pearly Gates. And after Hog's Back Ridge is where you will hit this bergschrund, this giant crack, and it is definitely a very risky endeavor to attempt, and I wouldn't even look at attempting it without a rope team for reasons I'll make obvious later in the story. Consider alternative routes. I will have a picture of a whole bunch of different routes in just a moment that you could think of in the moment as you're climbing it. So like you think that you have to commit to a route, but no, you will get up there, you will see something that's like, oh, that looks kind of crazy. I don't want to do that. That looks like mixed rock and ice. The route's in a bad place, or the bergschrund is ginormous. I'm not even gonna, or we don't have a rope. So in case you don't have a rope, I would seriously reconsider the trip. But there are paths to go without the rope. There's plenty of people who do it, but I would reconsider because we ended up using rope both times. Permits mandatory, but there's no limit for them, and we got them on arrival. So you don't have to, but things have changed with COVID. So I've noticed, for example, that right now on Rainier, you can't get the permits on arrival anymore. You have to get them prior. So if you're going anywhere around COVID times nowadays, just look at what's going on with permits, because I found all sorts of wacky stuff when I started looking through it. Is happening right now all over the place. The elevation of a Hood is 11,250 feet, and so it's not a 14er, it's not like the other mountains, but this is why it's healthy to start with these lower altitude peaks, because the amount of drop that you're going to experience from them, you're going to go from like 11,000 to ground level when you do it in one day. It's a fantastic effect in acclimatization, I found. You will gain about 5,400 feet in 3.4 miles. Remind you, this is at altitude. So you will be going slow, like really slow, especially for the last couple miles, and in the snow. So sort of like running in sand versus on pavement. You will be slowed down by multiple things. And it's a 6.8 mile round trip. Doesn't sound like a lot. Yes, it's doable in a day, and you can do stuff afterward, depending on how fast this goes and which person in your party experiences the least amount of altitude sickness or exhaustion. The main things to worry about when you're on there are steep snow, crevasses, and gas. So steep snow, as you approach the pearly gates, you will notice that the snow becomes very steep, and you will begin to see some people using ropes and setting up snow pickets. Not everybody does this. The most experienced mountaineers actually just go straight up, but different years are completely different. So if you're looking at pictures of people not using ropes on Hood, it's for that specific year, for that specific week. Because we encountered mixed conditions. We encountered literally sheer ice with rock, with like little patches of snow. And it was tricky. And it was like, we set up one snow picket, and it was definitely useful to do so. And you will see a picture of me coming down from that later. What do I mean by, so crevasses, that's the bergschrund. That's the crack in the snow and the ice. if you're close enough to look into it, you will see that the gap is enormous. Even though the crack might look small, like ours was like the size of a cathedral beneath it. When I looked, and I was like, oh man, you will see this in a moment. Gas. What do I mean by gas? There's a feature called the Devil's Kitchen, which is where sulfur and volcanic gases come out. And it's actually, there's a couple of places like that on Hood. And if you look at deaths on Hood, there's a handful that have happened because people get too close to these, not realizing there's no oxygen near them. There's very low oxygen because everything is filled with sulfur and with other gases. You will pass out, you will not know. You think that you will know because you think that, for example, if you hold your breath, you will notice that the buildup of CO2 in your system will make you gasp. But gases other than CO2 will not make you gasp. You will not know that you're being oxygen deprived until you're already unconscious. So avoid, like if you smell sulfur, just go around that area, avoid it, do not linger. Do not try and look into clouds of this stuff if there's one that's coming up. It's a real danger, and people have fallen in, and rescuers have gotten nearly killed, at least in the trips that I read up, just trying to get bodies out because this with oxygen masks. So this trip is typically done in 1 to 2 days. This one is often done, I think, is a 1 day. And if you want to, but if you want to experience like a comfortable hike, 2 day I think is a good thing. Like especially if you haven't done stuff like this before, and this is a fairly decent mountain to start off on. All right, so the two routes that I've done are Hog's Back Ridge and the Mazama Chute. And those are snippets from my GPS. And fortunately, they worked on this mountain. Sometimes my GPS does not work if I keep it in my front pocket, but it worked on this. So you can see on the top one, Hog's Back Ridge is a pretty straight shot upwards. And you can see the ascent and the distance and how long it took. The one beneath it, the Mazama Chute, you can see how it goes through Devil's Kitchen and then hangs a left. That was the year that the Hog's Back Ridge was in a bad place. And you can see it was 7 or so miles, and it took us 11 hours the first time using the Mazama Chute, and the second time it only took us 9 hours because we went up Hog's Back Ridge. So Hog's Back Ridge is technically faster if you do not get into a line of people because this is a popular mountain. Do try to get this one on a weekday. Moving on. So alternative routes. You will see the routes on here, and you'll see the Hog's Back Ridge and the Pearly Gates that I just talked about as the split route on the top. That is the most popular route. You will encounter the most amount of people there. And you can actually see the word Bergschrund, right, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, right above the Hog's Back Ridge. You can even see a small crack, but it is definitely a prominent feature, and it was a very risky maneuver. So moving on, and the fun pictures begin. So what you see here is me switching into snow gear and harness, and at the same time, this is when you begin to hit snow on Hood. And I'm going to talk about what snapshots means in just a little bit. I'm going to move to the picture to the right. Glacier goggles, highly important. You will go blind. If you haven't done a snow mountaineering before, we don't really get that kind of intensity here out on the East Coast, on Washington. But on the West Coast, this is midsummer. The sun is very, very, very strong. And sunscreen. So I was going to switch my camera to show you this, but I think I can just say it. My preferred sunscreen is this stuff called Cetaphil, which is typically a moisturizer, but there's one now with SPF 50. Works out, that's what I have in my hands right in that picture, and you can see that. And if you forgot the sunscreen, as it says in the lower right, I, by accident, figured out that if you actually use the normal Cetaphil moisturizer on burned skin, it makes the pain go away. It's like your skin, it's completely grease-free, which is why I use it. I typically hate greasy feeling anything. So there's that. and snapshots. So I wanted to include something personal in this because this was a very meaningful trip for me. And that picture, it's very interesting that Tatiana chose to take that picture at that time because I was taking a mental snapshot. So at that time, I had been experiencing what I found out later was depression, and I had like really bad thoughts in the evenings. And what I was doing here is I was not experiencing it, and I was taking a mental snapshot of like, see, this negativity is not always there. So that I could use this to argue with my mind when it would later in the evening say like things are always a certain way. And actually, this trip, and I say I had the depression in the past because of what happened on this trip. Actually, ended up making it go away completely due to an injury that I received on Rainier. Remind me to tell you that story when we get to Rainier. Moving on. So hiking upwards, this is us climbing up the snow. You will see me doing what I think is something I copied from a meme. I believe that is like the wooden Jesus statue that I've seen in a meme from like forever ago. I don't know where I got this from, but there's a bunch of pictures of it, and I'm just laughing at myself when I see it. So I decided to include it. Also, if you see where I'm wearing my ice axe, I'm wearing it like a sword because my friend decided to tell me that that's one of the acceptable ways of wearing it, and that was a mistake. Do not wear your ice axe like an idiot as you see me doing in this photo, because everything is fine when you're going up. It will be a lot less fine when you're going down, stabbing yourself with the back of your ice axe or getting caught in the snow. Or poking the person behind you. So don't do it. Moving on. So the Bergtrand, what you're seeing here is us actually coming down off the Bergtrand, and it is a significant obstacle. I took this from Wikipedia, and I see the message in chat, but I'm not able to read it. I'm just trying to get through unless it's urgent.
Not urgent.
It's thank you for being open about depression and your journey with it, including positive aspects. You know what? That's a personal message. I'm just gonna leave that off, and we can actually talk about it after this if you want. One-on-one if you don't want to talk about it with the group because this is on record for posterity in case I ever want to show it to like people who missed out on this today or to some other friends. So obstacles, Bergtrand. If you look in the picture in the left-hand side, you will see where the Bergtrand shows up. It's that big crack that you encounter as you head up to the head wall. And it shows up at the very beginning of the head wall. The Randkluft, we're learning German today, guys. The Randkluft is something we did not encounter. It might have been so small. What's important here is when we arrived at this thing, it was a complete surprise. The wiki definition at the bottom says it is a crevasse that forms when moving glacier ice separates from the stagnant ice or fern above. In case you don't know what fern is, which I had to Google myself, it is snow from last year that has turned into something in between snow and ice. That is, I believe it's a Swedish term. So what you're looking at here is actually us coming back over the Bergtrand on our way down from the mountain. You see Alexi's behind me. I'm second, and our lightest person, Tatiana, is the third. So the way that we saw a snow bridge across this with a hole in the middle, and we decided to still like chance it because it looked like there was a way to cross it. So the reason why I'm in the middle and some strategies that you should think about is I'm the heaviest person on this trip. I got something like 47 kilos on Alexi. I am the anchor. So as the person in the middle of the rope. So what would happen is I would anchor myself, Alexi would go across the Bergtrand, and we had some harrowing moments because he plunged through. He actually plunged through the snow where it looked like it already had a hole. But fortunately, at the bottom of that was an ice bridge. So he landed on an ice bridge. It was only like a couple feet beneath that snow. He is a professional. So he has been professionally guiding in the Soviet Union for many years, and uh, he does this for fun now. And I think he has like personal professionally guided trips that he does sometimes as well that you can ask him about if you like. He's on Facebook. And yeah, so he decided that this was safe, and based on who he was with and on his experience, and he decided to try and cross it. He plunged through the snow, fortunately hit an ice bridge, went over to the other side, then anchored himself. At which point it was my turn to cross as the heaviest person, and I thought I would be the genius who tried to jump the gap around where this snow hole was, because I figured, oh, I could jump across it. And I began to jump, and as I landed on the other side, the snow crushed beneath me, and I ended up on the same ice bridge that Alexei was on, and ended up just basically swimming my way out and up to where we were to begin the pearly gates. Tatiana followed us because we were both on the other side already, and we were both anchored in. And that's how you cross a Bertrand if there is a snow bridge. And looking through that, into that crack, you really can't tell, but the amount of space there is mind-boggling. You think that you're basically standing at the edge of a tall building. And you do not want to end up there. Moving on. There we go. Okay, so pearly gates. This is a picture of us actually coming down, but it looks the same coming up. Uh, this is right after the Bertrand that you saw on the map there, and this is for what you need snow pickets, rope, highly recommend it. There are people, as I said, there's people who will see pictures of climbing without it. That's a different season, different year. Do not anticipate that you're going to get the same conditions. Anticipate that you will need rope, or that somebody on your team will not feel confident without it, and that this would be a way for you to help them through this, even if you feel that you don't need rope. There's mixed climbing. We didn't know this at this point. It looked like all snow. But when we got steeper into the pearly gates, we saw that there was a lot of ice on rock with small patches of snow. And fortunately, our crampons had really good front pointed teeth. So something you might consider is sharpening the front points of your crampons when you come up this, because you don't know when you'll have to bite into something that is slightly vertical. All right, moving on. And summit. So in order to speed things up, I packed a bunch of stuff into the summit slides. We got to the summit. We got back down to the car at about 4:15. We went shopping for food, and on the very same day, we drove to the campground near South Sister, which is in Oregon. And the next slide begins the South Sister expedition. So South Sister. South Sister is the third largest peak in Oregon. It is another volcano, and those are fun. I think most of the stuff that we climbed are volcanoes except Whitney. I think Whitney is not a volcano, but don't hold my word to it. I've done a lot of these stuff just mixes together. So we slept at a campground called Devil's Lake, which is someplace that you begin your hike from as well. So the trailhead is right there. It's a really good thing to set this up ahead of time if you can. There's no permits. The elevation is 10,358 feet. Another very healthy dose for you to come up in one day and then come back down to ground level. That'll help your acclimatization for all these bigger peaks that you have coming up. I think you should always front load something smaller, and the strategy worked out perfectly. You will have 5,200 feet of gain in about 6.5 miles, 13-mile round trip. There will be snow patches, and your feet will likely get wet. But look at the trip reports. There isn't always snow. Snow was hanging around for longer this year than some other years. There's also loose scree of every size, and I have never had to do this before, but I actually had to put on my micro spikes for the scree because it was that slippery. It's like a scree made not of small compacted things, but of extremely loose red volcanic rock. You will see it later. And this is typically done in one day. This is the route itself. It's about 13 miles, ascent 1,500 feet. You can see the statistics of coming up and coming down. Took us that 7-hour mark. And hiking upwards, you will encounter really nice meadows, really beautiful lakes. I think it's probably one of the prettiest hikes that we did. You know what, they're all pretty. I'm not going to judge it. They're fantastic. And moving on, as you climb up, you will see these really cool features that I called snow labyrinths. If you look down on the picture on the left-hand side, and you look to the right, you can see that it looks like a Minotaur's labyrinth. At least to me it does. And I felt like, this is amazing. I want a tattoo of this one day, maybe. And then on the right-hand side, you will see me again doing my Jesus statue pose. I don't really know what I was thinking. I have no excuses left. You will see the red scree, and there was definitely snow, and microspikes or hill sounds are a fantastic call for this, even in the scree. Moving on, this is the summit, and after which we returned to camp for rest and sleep for the first time. So basically we did Hood and South Sister in a row together, and it just worked out that way. You don't have to make it that way. And here is also where you should be thinking about where you're going to find food as you're driving to Shasta the next day if you choose to do a similar route. Now, I tried to embed a video of the summit inside of this presentation, but it just refused to embed itself. So I'm going to see if I can just show you the video from my documents. Give me just a moment. I hope you guys can hear the audio. Can you guys see it? Are you guys able to see this?
Yeah, we see it.
Perfect.
And I think that right there is the other two sisters. There's the total thing, right? Middle sister right there.
And that is the volcanic cone that exploded however many centuries ago.
Awesome, man.
All right, back to the presentation. So that was the summit, and now we're moving on to Shasta. Shasta, logistics. It is the border crossing into California. It's right in the northern part of California, so it's really not that far from the border crossing. And you need to be concerned about that primarily because I have never been asked before to pull over and talk about stuff I had in my car as I was crossing from a state, not Canada, except in California, because I was asked whether we had fruit, the quantity of fruit. Like I had to confess that I had a watermelon. I was like, damn, I didn't know if this would be a thing. And then they said, how many? And I said one, and then they waved me through. Starting Shasta, we started around 3 a.m. There are self-issued permits at the trailhead. This was our first 14ers at that day, Sir Endless Strip at 14,180 feet. The hike itself is 7,200 feet of gain in a single and 5.1 miles coming up, and 10 something miles coming down round trip. Your biggest issues are going to be steep snow and berg trends. We didn't encounter any berg trends, but if you look on all trails right now, you will see people have reported there are berg trends. So I can't tell you where to expect them. But steep snow, this was the steepest snow I have ever climbed. This was red, I think I said, it's not red brick, it sounds like red brick. but it's called like a red barrier or something. It's a wall. It's basically a very, very steep snow wall that you'll be climbing for a long time. And there are people who glissade it, which is to say they slide on their butts all the way down. And we spoke to a person who, one of the rangers, a day after somebody had been, I'm sorry, I'm not even sure if this was a day after, the week after, somebody had to be rescued because they glissaded down Shasta and in the process got flipped in reverse. So on their back and head first, the snow then took off their pants, and it, by the time that they stopped, they had shaved off like huge amounts of like skin, and there was like blood, and it was an epic mess. And they had to be airlifted out. The person was embarrassed. Uh, we got the whole story, but it's probably not the best place to recall it. But I would not recommend glissading. It's going to be super tempting. But this is steep. This is like, and depending on time of day, also like if it's very hard, you're going to go very fast. If it's soft, you might be able to control it a little bit better. So be mindful of these things. And also cultural beliefs. This is important because Shasta is considered a very spiritual mountain because it's important to many, many, many different cultures. Something like 4 or 5 cultures. Driving up to it, you will see that there's places you can pull off, like where I took this picture from, where it says that such and such a culture believes it is the seat of their creator God. It's important to Native Americans, many different groups of them. And it's also got some woo-woo around it, with people saying they saw UFOs and all these things that happen. But what's interesting is the mindset that you go in with. If you, there's actually something interesting that I'll bring up in just a moment, because it's for me it was all woo-woo, but it's interesting in the mountains when you can get into a euphoric state, what you are willing to suspend. So going to the next picture. So this is the 3 a.m. start, and we essentially got there, slept in our car for just a little bit. This is after we got up in Oregon, after sleeping after South Sister, we drove for food and then drove to Shasta. So we had our day of rest. This was our first day of sleep. We came sometime around 11 p.m. and then we started around 3 a.m. and we took a sleeping break for a couple of hours. My friend Alexei slept against the side of my car. Tatiana slept in the back of my car, and I slept in the front seat. And I listened to some podcasts that kind of set the mood for me. That I think put me into, I don't know how to say this, like a spiritual mood. I'm not typically like a religious person, but your mountains can cause all sorts of euphoria. Volcanic dust is definitely there, and you will not see it until you start hiking and you have your headlamp. So what I mean by mountain euphoria is a fun part for me on this was everything was so new and so different, and this was the 3rd mountain that I was doing, that you feel completely out of your element. Like you're in a foreign country, foreign place that other people don't go. It's not even a country. It's sort of like a completely different environment that no part of you has any experience in. So my mind was in a lofty place, and the podcast that I listened to said, talked about treating things as sacred, like in the absence of knowing what to do in life when you come to like a fork in the road, or if you're going to choose one job or another, one relationship or another, in the absence of knowing which direction to take, to simply treat the decision that you take as sacred and to look for what is sacred in it, which to me meant sacred like Indiana Jones. Like, this is an object, there's something sacred about it, you don't know what is sacred about it. So your whole point is questioning. And that's how I started this hike. Sounds silly, but it's true. Started it, had the headlamp on. Headlamp created a huge tunnel through the volcanic dust, giving everything a surreal feel. The mountain itself looks sort of like if you ask a 5-year-old to draw a volcano or a mountain, it will draw you Shasta. It is a perfect cone. And against the night sky, it is completely black. and surrounded by all the stars. It's very picturesque, apparently both at night and in the day. And it has this winding path that looks like it's taken straight out of Tibet that heads up to a place called Horse Camp. So in the middle of this, I kind of suspended my disbelief and I asked the mountain something, and I think my subconscious answered me in a certain way, and I was kind of blown away. I'm pretty sure it was a meditative experience. But if you want to ask the mountain something on your way there, it might actually tell you something useful, because what it told me, or what my subconscious might have told me, actually ended up helping me out. So before I sound like too much of a crazy person, let's proceed to the next slide. Gear. So Shasta is both a lot of dirt, a lot of land, and snow travel. And since this one was basically almost half and half, I decided that it would be faster to have my trail runners for the first half and then switch into my mountaineering boots in the second half. So this is why you see the mountaineering boots tied to the back of my pack, sitting next to the car, completely ready before I even went to sleep. And another interesting thing is halfway up, we actually, I'm not saying everybody should do this, but it worked out for us. We stowed our gear. We basically hid it amidst the rocks on one of the rock outcroppings because we didn't want to take it with us up the actual mountain. Most people do this mountain in 2 days. Shasta is typically, like, very, very rarely is it done in 1 day. At least that's all the records that I could find that said it. Most people come up and they sleep, and I'll talk to you about a place called Helen Lake Camp. I'll talk to you about it in just a moment. And that's where they leave their gear. But since we went light, so no tent, no extra food, no stuff to melt snow for water, just you're going up as light as and fast as you can, we hid our stuff amidst the rocks. And it worked out. Just a thought, do it at your own risk, but there it is. Next slide. We have, this is the route itself. It's actually, unfortunately, not the whole route. My GPS cut out on me when we were getting to the very top. The place you see us start at the bottom is called Bunny Flats. That's the parking lot, and that's where the trailhead is. Helen Lake Camp is the camp before, keep blanking on this, the red barrier, red wall, something like that, Redding Wall, that starts immediately after the Helen Lake Camp. And you will see that's why people camp there, is because it is a massive effort to climb this thing. And then straight to summit after the wall was not particularly demanding. It's not easy, but it's not, like, it will not compare to what you have just gone through. And as I mentioned in here, my GPS stopped working, so unfortunately only part of this hike. Moving on to the next. There we go. Shasta. There we go. It's called Red Banks. Your main obstacles are going to be Red Banks, that super steep wall, the false summit. So you will come up on a summit you will go to a place called Misery Hill. So it is like it sounds. It's basically a long slog, and it will lead you to a false summit. So do not get your hopes up after the Redding Wall. And Bertrand's, as I mentioned, that I did not encounter, but that I have read about in the other reviews. Moving on. Summit itself. We hit the summit. You see Tatiana and I up there taking a picture. And what you don't see is the 100 people, maybe not 100, but a ton of people who are up there with us. And Alexi is taking the photo. So we hit the summit. We returned down. I got the lowdown about the guy who had his pants taken off by the mountain from the ranger. Then we drove halfway to Whitney and camped. It's a fairly long drive. You will be, and the next day we drove from our camp to Whitney itself through Yosemite. This actually took us like more than 1 day of travel. And Yosemite had a lot of narrow, clogged roads and very few places where you could pass. So I got to a place where I could pass, and I sped up to pass the camper vans that were going around. And of course, there was a cop there. So I got a speeding ticket. So be careful of the places where you can pass. If you truly speed up to overtake the camper vans, just know that the cops are waiting there because they know how frustrated people have been as they drove through Yosemite behind these super slow moving vehicles. Moving on. And if I had my camera, I could show you pictures of Yosemite, but sadly, I need an SD card reader. Whitney. Whitney has got a different set of challenges. The biggest challenge I encountered was the permit. It was rough. Competing for permits, the first round of permits for every single day that I submitted, we could not get. But apparently there's multiple rounds. So what happens is, if you have a group of people, one person claims to be the leader, they go and they submit for permits. What people actually do is, to get the permits for the dates that they want, is they have every single person apply as a separate leader for a group to get the permits. And then one of them will get it for the date that they need, and they will let the others expire, and they will expire within a certain amount of weeks. So that's why there's multiple rounds. So if you do not get the date that you want from the beginning, and you've already asked all the members of your group to try and get the dates, pretending that they are the leaders, then then just wait a little bit more, because the days that you want, ask them when the next round is, and they might open up. Because people have to claim the permits once they're allowed a certain date, and they will simply not claim the ones that they didn't end up using. The other catch is, on the day of your hike, you have to actually, or before, you have to claim them in person as well. Otherwise, the people who are in line to climb the mountain will claim yours after a certain time. There's like a certain time of the day, I want to say like 4 p.m., by which you will walk in and you'll see there's a line of people without permits waiting to claim yours, because if you don't show up. There's 1-day permits, and then there's 2-day permits. It was a fight to get even the 1-day permits. The elevation, it's the tallest mountain in the continental US. The elevation is 14,505, 6,656 gain, and 11.5 miles, 23 miles total round trip, so it's pretty long. And you'll be walking for 2.5 miles at altitude, which will begin to mean a lot more to you once you get there, because you will notice how when it's flat, you will start to try and walk fast, but you will hit this wall of exhaustion really quickly because your muscles can't keep up with the oxygen demand. You will oxygen starve yourself, so be very, very careful how fast you go. The temptation is very high to go faster. So typically this is done in 2 to 3 days. I think doing it in 1 day is popular based on what I read, but every single official guide says people do this in 2 to 3 days. Moving on. So start super early if you can. Not 3 a.m., but something like, let's say, if you're doing this in 1 day, at least 7 a.m. Pack light for being swift. This one is mostly rough. It shouldn't have things that will super slow you down. It has some snow spots, but we found nothing serious. So pack light, warrior trail runners, if that's what you wear for light hiking, and consider that there are places to refill with water, but ask the rangers the status of those places. There are absolutely mind-bendingly gorgeous water holes on the way up this thing. Like literally, just do not skip them. Go there to filter water anyway. Look at the crazy flowers. Look at the fish, and try and figure out how fish got there in the middle of a mountain. And just, I guess, enjoy the views, because it will get hot, and the views will be completely surrounding you. You will have Yosemite on one side, and you will have where you just came from, the valley, I forget its name, behind you. And one of the prettiest hikes I've ever done. This is our entire hike. My GPS worked the whole time. It's 23 miles. It took us 11 hours and 43 minutes. I never turned off the GPS, so this includes all of our breaks. It's the literal total time. It apparently does not read the altitude correctly. But what I can tell you is at 13,500 feet is when you hit the place where it becomes flatter and where you have the 2.5 miles of sucking wind coming your way. So don't destroy yourself. Obstacles, snow patches, and bottlenecks of people. You can see me doing my stupid hand gesture again. And the snow patches that as you get up, they actually can generate the bottlenecks because that's where we experience people getting really anxious about hiking through because they didn't anticipate for there to be snow. Most people didn't anticipate for there to be snow. It lasts sometimes. Just read the trip reports and anticipate that you will have a very little bit of patches somewhere. Moving on, the actual summit. I'm going to show you the video, and then I'll comment on the rest of it. One second.
All right, everybody. Summit of Mount Whitney.
As you can see, plenty of people. And there are a bunch of elite runners who do this 23-mile run that we ran into, which was awesome. And that's basically going to be what your views are like all the way up. It's just mind-blowing. All right. So on the same day, we returned to camp. We drove halfway to Rainier, and we camped at just a random campground in the woods. The day after that, we finished our drive to Rainier, and we were starting Rainier at 7 p.m. that day. So we're going to do Rainier in one day as well. Moving on, Rainier, our final summit. The one that I have failed several times. Several stories. Your concerns here are the walk-up permits. As you know now with COVID, it's going to take a little bit extra effort. The elevation, you're not that far away from being on the tallest mountain in the U.S. It's only like 100-foot difference. And it's very important to note here that the altitude is higher. Sorry, not the altitude, I think longitude. The longitude is higher and closer to the, further from the equator. So what this means is, if you have a mountain that's the same 14,000 feet, but closer to the equator, you will have more oxygen at altitude than you will on a mountain that is further away from the equator. So while Rainier is 100 feet shorter than than Whitney, it is a bigger hit to your lungs and your body than Whitney is for several reasons. And one of them is that you will encounter lower oxygen at the same altitude. The amount of elevation gain is very high. You will gain almost 9,000 feet in 7.3 miles. Total round trip is 15 miles. The weather is very unpredictable, even in the middle of summer. One of the reasons we weren't able to summit it during our first volcano tour was that it got snowed in, and even the rangers couldn't get through. And this was in the middle of summer. Just a freak storm comes through from one of the islands off of the side of Washington, and it snowed over. And the rangers have to clear it, and the rangers have to be there also because they along with the guide groups set up the ladders across the crevasses that you're going to be crossing. And you will be relying on them completely. So let them do their thing. Do not go without calling them, I would say. So unpredictable weather, steep snow. Steep snow kicks in after the Ingram Flats. You will see that you begin to zigzag up the mountain. You will have deep snow that leading up, especially, and you will feel how deep it is, especially on the day coming down, because you will start sinking in some places as you come down. So try and stay up there as little as you can, because the more the snow melts, the more likely you will start plunging into it with every one of your steps. Multiple crevasses. You will have ones that have ladders over them. You will want to be at a point of where you're hitting the crevasses on the Ingraham Glacier around midnight. You do not want the weather, you do not want sun, you do not want them to be warm up and all of a sudden moving and unstable. You want it to be night. And you will see everybody else is gearing up around midnight as well. You will see whole trains of headlights heading up to the summit of Rainier. We were the first pair of headlights on Rainier on that day. We got up the earliest. And just because we were doing this in one day, it worked out this way with our timing. I'll talk more about timing later. And altitude sickness here is actually very high for several reasons. You're exerting a ton of effort. You don't even know how much, because the altitude is hitting you. You're hiking in the snow. You're gaining a ton of elevation at the same time, and you have nowhere to get water. You have to bring stuff with you to melt water, and you have to bring stuff with you if you want to go to the bathroom. These blue bags you have to pick up at the ranger station. And this is typically done in 2 to 3 days. We ended up doing it in a total of 17 hours, nonstop from 7 p.m. until like 11 something the next day. We were only able to do it because we acclimated on the other peaks, and even then it was absolutely crushing. You'll see what I mean in just a moment. So this is the beginning. There's a place that you can eat. This is the time of food load. So you will have, there's a fantastic pizza place and lots of good beer, like right next to Rainier, run by the Whitaker Company. They're fairly famous mountaineers. And if you want to look strong in your photos, should probably be the place where you pose and get your photo taken, because the mountain itself will definitely humble you very fast. Moving on, gear-wise, prepare for snow from the beginning. So I've been on Rainier a handful of times. Typically, well, it depends on times of year, but sometimes there's snow from the very first steps, and sometimes you have a bit to walk before you hit the snow. This time there was snow from the very, very first steps. I would not bring dry weather shoes with me. I feel that is a waste of weight, and you can just start with if you see the shoes that I have, those are Las Portivas. They are for basically crossover rock and snow type hiking. You will see, I forget the model name, but on their website you will see things that look exactly like this. They are insulated, so there is a version of this that's not insulated. You want the insulated one. And it's essentially a hiking / snow hiking crossover that is completely stiff and can take a semi-automatic crampon. And that's what we started with, and it turned out to be a fantastic choice. So as you're going up, also have snow melting equipment for water, at least one person. Do not forget your beacon. And this slide almost corrected me to say bacon. Fortunately, I remember to correct it to beacon, but then I thought to myself, like, bacon would have been nice. Snow pickets for each person on this one, because you have no idea what kind of stuff happens with the crevasses. All the people on this group had crevasse rescue training. I do not recommend this trip if you have not had crevasse rescue training, either with AMC or with or officially. Do not do this in one day unless people who you're with you really trust and you have experienced using pickets. Essentially, you have to set up a pulley system to get somebody out of a crevasse. And unlike any of the other mountains we mentioned, the chances of you falling into one are highest on here, on this mountain, out of anything that I have said. All right, moving on. Oh, and that, by the way, is a snow picket that you see that's obscuring my ice axe. In case you wanted to know what that is. It's like a long piece of aluminum with a cross section that looks like the letter T that you plunge into the snow that cannot easily be moved out of the snow. Moving on, roping up after Camp Muir. So after Camp Muir, before you get to Ingram Flats, this is where you will actually rope up because the crevasses begin shortly after that. What's interesting is you will learn a lot about rope management as you climb the mountain, which is very interesting because when you hit zigzags, for example, you will notice that your rope begins to swing and you will have to be going up quickly behind the person who you are behind or you're going to get pulled or somebody's going to get pulled as you zigzag through, which can become very annoying. What you see in the lower left-hand side is us coming up a place called Disappointment Cleaver. Some years this is covered by snow. Many years, like every time that I've been up there twice now, it's been completely rock. So, and you will still be in crampons, and you'll probably be shooting up sparks. Just know that it's normal. Make sure you invest in good crampons. I had my my Petzls, and they were fantastic. I was once in Rainier, the one time where I had that altitude sickness, and I had my crampons were made by Camp. I simply got something that I thought was more affordable, and they broke. It was one of the reasons I struggled so much trying to get up is because I had to stop and fix my crampons every little, every maybe 15, 20 minutes. So invest in a good pair of crampons that can go through the rock as well as the snow if you're going to do Rainier, because seems to be a decent chance that you'll be going up rock. Moving on, the summit itself. As you can see, I'm basically almost completely out of myself in the picture on the left. At the summit, I'm super elated after so many attempts at this, finally to achieve this, and being completely exhausted in all the best ways possible. And you can see our photo, I'm still out of it, and then signing the guest book on the right. Moving on, the descent, which is we didn't talk about on the other mountains, but the descent is always the most dangerous part. And this is double true for Rainier. You have every single challenge I just mentioned coming up, but you have it slightly worse because you have just been completely exhausted. You're already having some form of altitude sickness. Fortunately, you're managing it well, and if you need to take any one of the medications I mentioned in the beginning in order to come back to full consciousness, this is the time to check in with yourself to see how you feel. Like, do you have a headache? Are you extra thirsty? Are you like, when was the last time you got to pee? Because that actually helps. You need to expel water. How does your breathing feel? Have you hyperventilated yet on purpose? And a piece of strategy that I meant to mention in the beginning, I have a breathing technique that I developed when I had a trip last year in Colorado where I did a bunch of 14ers and I developed this technique, and if this is useful for you, I would totally use it. Do you see how I have poles in my hands? If you synchronize your breathing with your use of the poles, and since you'll be moving slowly due to altitude, this will be completely possible. You inhale with one pole down, you exhale with the other pole coming down. And what this does is you will breathe in a bunch extra, and you will notice when you break the pattern of extra breathing. And you will not be dizzy either from the extra breathing because you'll be at altitude no matter if you're going to 14ers in Colorado or you're going to the 14ers here. So breathe in with one pole coming down, breathe out with the second pole coming down, and play with it as you like. What's interesting, it's just interesting how your mind will attach one to the other, and you will notice when you break the pattern. Okay, back to the pictures. On the way down, you will have the same issue with the zigzagging coming down along the paths, the steep part from the summit to Ingram Flats, which is also something I'm just reminded I wanted to talk to you about. We talked about depression earlier, and I talked about how an injury on this mountain helped me actually resolve it. And what happened was On the way up, these zigzags are some of them are nearly vertical, and you will see a whole bunch of pickets and carabiners stuck into the mountain that you will have to take your rope through. And when the person ahead of you has trouble taking their rope through, whether because they haven't done it often or because they're experiencing altitude, you're going to be stuck there on a nearly vertical zigzag, and you better be in a comfortable position. There was a bunch of times when I was not in a comfortable position, putting essentially all of my weight into the front of my foot with only a single foot literally dug into the mountain. And what that caused is my calves were just destroyed. I had to like scream in pain and swear at the person ahead of me once just to get them to move along because they were fiddling with the carabiner trying to get the rope through. And I was just completely suffering in so many ways and infuriated that I decided to swear because I couldn't get the pain out in any other way. And I'll explain in a moment how it led into what injury. On the descent, on the most dangerous part as you're coming down, watch the ladders on the crevasses. Some of the ladders might have come loose, at which point the guides will actually remove them, and your path on the way back will become different from the path that you took on the way there. At this point, this is why GPS is such a great idea to take up if you have to truly change things up. And in our case, we were both the first people up the mountain and the first people off the mountain, so we had to make our own path. Fortunately, all of our ladders were still in place because the snow was still really good, and we didn't have to alter our path. But my first time on Rainier, we did have to alter our path on the way down because the ladders had melted through. And finally, celebration. At the very end, we went to the same pizza place where basically you get to eat 2 whole pizzas in the same day. It's a fantastic feeling. Back when I used to be able to eat pizza and didn't have a gluten allergy. And also, if you can, bring an artist, which was interesting to me because my friend Tatiana was so grateful that we took her on this trip that she actually painted these for us in the weekend afterwards and gifted them to me. So I have them in my bedroom. They're probably like my proudest possessions. I would grab them as the first thing if this house ever started on fire, and already told myself. And the end. So I want to mention this injury that I got. Plantar fasciitis. I think a lot of runners know what that is. Essentially, the bottom of your foot has experienced some tearing of the plantar fascia, which is a kind of like a muscle fibrous system, and you need to take a very long break in order for you to come back to being able to like walk without pain and wake up without pain and run without pain. And I took a 2-month break, and during that break, I tried intermittent fasting, which is how I discovered that I had a gluten allergy. When all of a sudden my mood completely cleared up towards the end of like the second week of my doing these intermittent whole day, 2-day, sometimes 2.5-day fasts, and it was like somebody turning off a light switch. It was not even gradual. So it was a fantastic end for me, despite the injury. And that's it. I will open up to any questions that you guys might have if you're still around.
I'll ask a question. Did you have any moments that were the most special, even though they were all special?
The most special? Oh, the summit of Rainier. That cannot be beaten after so many failed attempts. Also getting to know Tatiana and Alexei. It's like I'm a fairly social hiker, I guess. And you really get to know people during trials like this. Those experiences are like inexplicable. They will be forever burned into my brain. I'll probably have them flash in front of me on my last day. Any more questions if you're still awake? There might not be, which is not a problem. All right.
You're gonna
So
take on.
I'm sorry, did you say you have a question?
Oh yeah, what's the next peak that you're looking forward to?
With COVID, there has been no plans. I do not know. I might go to Colorado. I might go to New Zealand. I might go to Taiwan. There's a bunch of stuff going through my mind. Yeah, but those are my main thoughts. All right. Nadia, do you have a question for me?
Um, which of them was the most challenging?
Rainier, that was the most brutal. That's if I did that as anything but the last, it would have probably not gone so well.
I'm curious, doing that much of elevation gain in that short time overall, how it feels like from the beginning to the end. Do you feel it you getting gradually more tired, or it gets better at some point and then worse? How it?
It's interesting because it's different every time. Altitude is even so. I think the guidebooks tell you this, that even if you didn't experience altitude when you went to a mountain the first time, that the second time you might experience it, and it feels the same way when I go up these mountains. Is going up to Camp Muir. Sometimes you feel it, sometimes you don't. Ingram Flat, sometimes you feel it, sometimes you don't. It feels like, and to answer your question more directly, sometimes it feels like a sudden onset, and sometimes it feels like a gradual onset. So I wouldn't say that it's always one way. I would look for other signs also. I would look for, like, well, first of all, rely on other people to also tell you. Have somebody who knows what it's like, and see if you can notice it yourself. If you start at all walking like you're maybe a little bit drunk, that's typically the first sign that people notice, even though that there's a bunch of other signs, but you just become slowly mentally disabled, so you can't even notice the other signs. And the first one you will definitely start noticing that you can't ignore is the stumbling.
Isha, I guess my question was more like during this one trip, did it help the previous mountains to acclimatize you for the next mountains? And did you get gradually exhausted as you have more and more, you did more and more mountains and you have more and more physical work to do? Like how, would you think best way possible, or you would change something in it? Like it's a very phenomenal, it's a lot of workout during just 10 days, right?
Right.
So
it's altitude wise, it got easier. Physically, I could feel some mountains more than others physically. Rainier, while being physically very difficult, altitude-wise, was its biggest strike on my body. So altitude begins not to feel as bad the more mountains you do. Your own body will tell you if exhaustion is something you need to be concerned about. I did not feel too exhausted on any one of them that I can remember, even ones that we started off with, like at 3 a.m. or at 7 p.m. I definitely remember feeling exhausted after my drives. The drive, well, the longer ones, like coming from Whitney to Rainier, that was like a day, and then you sleep, and then I had to drive for another 6 hours before we got to Rainier. And that part definitely, I think, played into some extra fatigue.
thank you.
Yeah, it's weird. It's sort of like the driving was more exhausting than the hiking.
You'll ask to the general chart if this talk was recorded. Are we going to get recording?
I did record it. Let me see about the chat. Yes, Yulia, this is being recorded, and I will find a way to host it, probably on YouTube, on my YouTube, and then send it out to the list of people and post it on my Facebook.
Thanks, that will be good. Any more questions, anyone?
And you can ask me questions about even, let's say, the mystical experience in Shasta or the depression itself. I'm actually pretty open about it, and if it's important to you, then feel free to ask me a question.
I've heard about Shasta a lot, and you mentioned that it was special. Were there any more things about that you'd like to share with us about mystical or other special feelings on Shasta?
I simply, when I started feeling kind of euphoric, and when we began the hike, I had asked it a question, just something I directed, and I got an answer that I think only I would understand. And I used that answer on the rest of the trip. It had to do with how to treat the people I was with. Yeah, I think that's all I could say about it, because it could have more meaning to me. But yeah, I'm typically not the woo-woo type, but it was interesting.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, and wait, I just saw your message. And Katie, thank you guys for attending. And I'm glad that you were able to listen from abroad. And I'm glad to Jesse a lot, actually, for making this possible. I didn't know that I would get a chance to present it and relive it, and I guess share it with you guys. Yeah. Any other questions, or how are we feeling? Like, Dina, do you have a quick? Oh.
I'm just wondering, was this presentation supposed to happen in person before COVID, or this was specially planned for online stuff?
This was not planned at all. This was something. So Jesse saw me posting. So you know how Facebook has memories? Like, it reminds you from past couple of years. Jesse saw me posting a memory about another mountain, about Denali, and he asked me if I'd be willing to present about Denali. And I told him, I was like, well, that trip was only a couple of days because I had to end it short, but I have this other thing that I did. And he's like, oh, can you present about this other thing? And that's how this ended up coming together. I only found out I had to put this together 3 weeks ago.
Cool.
And most of it came together both yesterday and today. Oh man, if only.
Great story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right. Will that be all? I
don't have a question, but thank you, Mikhail. This is Jess.
Jess, oh, you're
Yeah.
welcome.
Thanks.
You're welcome. If anybody wants to speak about any mountain individually that they want to be presenting in the future, I could give you even more details. There was just so much to try and fit into this that I knew I couldn't go into everything. There's definitely more things that I would say about it, and there's a lot of guides online about gear. We didn't talk at all about actual clothing, what types of food, how much water, temperature regulation, all those things that I had to completely leave out due to timing. right. That's it. That's it. Thank you, everyone. This has been fantastic. Liz, I just saw your camera turn back on.
Oh yeah, just to say thank you.
All right. Let me stop sharing so I could say thank you in person. It's kind of dark here now, isn't it? All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening, and feel free to ask me questions anytime in the future about any of it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you,
Right.
Mr. Wonderful presentation.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Have a good night.